Our national parks were created to be protected forever, but that promise is being broken. Right now, the people who keep these parks running are being fired. The lands we love could be sold to private companies for drilling, and future generations might not get to experience them the way we have. We don't know exactly how bad it will get, but we do know that once these places are gone, they're gone. So what can we do about it? Let's talk about it in today's episode. Welcome to Stoked, the podcast that helps adventure elopement photographers hit six figures and beyond in their businesses without hustling on social media. I'm your host, Megan McPhail, a former burnt-out emergency veterinarian that quit my hard-earned career to become an elopement photographer. Now I'm living a life I absolutely love, full of travel, adventure, and financial abundance, and I am hell-bent on helping you do the same. Are you ready to start booking out your calendar with dream couples in breathtaking locations and feeling genuinely stoked about your elopement photography business, life, and bank account? Then let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, it's your host, Megan McPhail.
And your co-host, Todd Reedy.
And today's episode is all about what's going on in the national parks. We could also talk about the national forest, but just for the ease of conversation, I'm going to focus on the national parks today. And if you've been watching the news or just scrolling on Instagram, you probably know that over 1,000 national park employees have been fired, and that includes rangers, maintenance workers, and educators. And there's a lot of conversations happening about this, even in the elopement photographer mastermind. You know, the students are worried about what that means for eloping in national parks and what we can do and how we can talk to our couples about it. So what's worrying is that with fewer staff, national parks were already understaffed as is. So now with 1,000 less employees, that could mean longer wait times, that could mean closed facilities, that could mean safety concerns. I know one of the employees fired from Yosemite was their only EMT and first responder.
Awful.
And in his Instagram post, he was like, I don't know how the park can function without me. So there's definitely not just concerns about bathrooms being closed and trash being everywhere and, spending hours in line to get into the park, like what Big Bend has been seeing lately. They've had like mile-long lines to get in, whereas it used to be like a couple cars. But then also the safety concerns. And a lot of people are worried that these layoffs are really the first step in kind of a more sinister plan by our administration, where they want to sell off public lands to create like this sovereign wealth fund, which I was like, what the heck is that? And it's basically getting money by selling off the land and then using it to like invest in things so that the government has more money. But it's really short-sighted. That's the biggest controversy about it, is like once you use up these lands for mining and drilling and commercial development, you might get money in the short term. But overall, once these lands are gone, they're gone. We can't get them back. So there's a lot of lawsuits being filed, and the potential impact is just unknown at this time. I don't want to be alarmist. I don't want to catastrophize, but we got to do what we can do to make sure that these parks are national parks, which were the best thing our government ever did, was to create these national parks and have them open to the public so that we can enjoy these landscapes. The worst thing that could happen would be to have them privatized. I don't want to see our lands ruined, and I don't want the lack of staff to be the thing where it's like, oh, see, these parks aren't being run very well. Let's sell them off. So that's worst case scenario. The parks get sold off and mined and drilled and developed commercially. And who knows if that will happen. Again, I don't want to be alarmist or anything like that. But there are things that we can see now that's going to affect how we use these lands and how we help our couples elope in these lands.
Yeah, and before I did any digging into this, like I saw, the Instagram posts and kind of the clickbaity type headlines and things. So I kind of wanted to get a better understanding of what's going on and the impact. And so let me read you off something. This is from a White House fact sheet on the executive order that basically these firings of employees kind of fell under. So let me read it. So it says, quote, "The government wastes billions of dollars each year on duplicative programs and frivolous expenditures that fail to align with American values or address the needs of American people, end quote. But that's just like straight up not true when it comes to the national parks. I saw in one Pew Research study basically just said that doesn't align, that the National Park Service tops the list of government agencies that is in high favor with the U.S. adults, and that basically across the board, the national parks is one of America's greatest treasures. It's something that is really important, and obviously a lot of people go to that. I also wanted to see like how popular national parks are. So the latest data that's been released is from 2023. The data shows that more than 325 million people visited national parks. So this isn't just like a small set of, weekend warriors or families that visit these things every once in a while for spring breaks. Like this is a huge amount of people that attend these parks like across the nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're super important. So this concern isn't just like in the elopement photography space that, brings in thousands of eloping couples into these things. Like these national parks are widely, immensely popular. And so it's like
loved and
yeah. And like Megan said, they were protected for a reason because they're freaking amazing. Like people travel all over the world to visit these national parks that we have in our backyard. And it's just bullshit.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Trying to keep it cool over here, but like it's absurd. Bullshit. And you may say like, 1,000 jobs probably isn't that much, but it's kind of like the first step in what could potentially be a much more severe like downfall of our national park systems.
Yeah. And they were supposed to be protected forever. And we were the first country in the world to designate a national park or create a national park. And that was Yellowstone back in like 1872, I think. So these parks have been part of our country for hundreds of years, and they were meant to be protected forever. And park visitors continue to go up every year while staffing has been poor, and if anything, we should have better staffing for our national parks, and especially when it comes to safety. Like firing the first responder in Yosemite is just crazy to me.
Yeah, that's one instance. But when you think about across the board how much space is in these national parks and with limited staff, right, it's just going to take longer for emergency services to get into these parks. Your average police officer, fireman, or paramedic from like outside of those parks, they're maybe familiar with the parks, but they're not working day in and day out in the parks like the actual staff is. And like they just don't know the nuances and like the intricacies of the trails, all the different locations and things like that. It's just, I think it's opening up a big Pandora's box of sadness and bad things to come.
Yeah, I really hope it doesn't come to some of the like worst case scenarios. So let's talk about how this might affect us. Well, we're going to talk about that, and then we're also going to talk about what we can do about this. So when it comes to how this might affect our jobs as elopement photographers and how we serve our couples, I think really what we need to communicate to them is that we don't have a crystal ball. We cannot predict the future. We can only kind of operate with what we know now. And so right now, what we might find is that with decrease in staffing, that there could be permit processing delays, there could be potential park closures or limited access or closed parking lots or closed trailheads. There could be more crowds and longer wait times. I know a lot of national parks have been switching over to like timed entry things. Zion was supposed to do that this year. Now there's some confusion if that's going to even go into play this year. So more wait times to get into the park, as like what we're seeing in Big Bend right now, where the entry points had like a mile-long line of cars trying to get in. We could see closed bathrooms, less maintenance of restrooms, less maintenance of trails and campgrounds, more trash everywhere. So really preparing for minimal services, maybe prioritizing sunrise elopement so you can get in before the crowds, having backup locations in mind, and then applying for permits as early as possible are some of the things that we could do to mitigate that. So we just have to be able to communicate with our couples, let them know that we can't predict the future, and have backup plans in case places are closed down. Now, if you are a seasoned elopement photographer, you're pretty used to dealing with sudden trail closures or stuff like that. You know how to kind of like work around that and create backup plans and communicate with your couples. Like we frequently create backup plans based on if there's still snow where we wanted to go at high altitude and we can't get to where we wanted to go, or in Zion there's like rock falls and stuff like that happen overnight, so then you wake up on the elopement day and the trail you wanted to go to is closed. Crazy stuff could happen at any time in nature, right? So being able to communicate what's going on in our national parks is very similar to how you should be communicating with your couples in general. I also think it would help if us as a community kind of report back on the status of the national parks. Like if a trailhead is closed, let people know by communicating it on Instagram or in a Facebook group if you're in those. Let other photographers know that the line to get into Yosemite was 3 hours at 3:00 or something like that. We're going to need to kind of like crowdsource some information on what's going on with the national parks. The good news that I found kind of buried in an article was that the administration has approved hiring 7,700 seasonal national park employees. So that's good. So they might be struggling right now, but maybe come summer, things might be looking up. So that's some good news that nobody's talking about, and it was kind of buried.
Yeah, so I did read that as well in multiple places. Another thing that I'm hopeful of is that I did see in the last couple of weeks that there was like 1,000 or 1,200 governmental employees with a different national government agency, the NNSA, which is the National Nuclear Securities Agency, which governs and like basically does stuff with our nuclear weapons, that they were like instantaneously like laid off / fired. And then basically that organization kind of recanted and like went back to basically unfire them.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this is just a temporary thing and we don't have to worry about it, but that hasn't happened yet from what's being like released in the national media. So yeah, it's just a bad deal that we're hopeful that it won't get any worse.
Yeah, I think the National Park Service, like the agency, is taking these firings to court and saying that they were wrongfully terminated. Because I think part of the language of their termination was like your performance reviews weren't up to snuff, essentially. But a lot of these were long-term employees, and looking back on their performance reviews, they were all excellent. And even the probationary employees that were fired, their reviews were also excellent. So whatever they're saying is the reason why these people were fired is just not true. And hopefully they'll get their jobs back. Hopefully the parks can get a bunch of seasonal employees and like everything can kind of go back to normal. Hopefully this isn't the start of privatizing and selling off our lands. And again, communicating with our couples, just like how I communicate with our couples about weather. I can't predict the future, and I really got to see what the conditions are within like a day or two of their elopement before we do any big changes, you know? So just letting them know that you're there for them and that you have a plan no matter what happens. And if it's no big deal, like bathrooms are closed and there's some trash, like you can still have an amazing elopement day. But maybe pivoting to sunrise if getting into the park is really challenging might be something you need to talk to people about. We almost always do elopements in national parks at sunrise to beat the crowds. So that might be something people should pivot to if they aren't already.
Yeah, and this may also be a perfect time to start implementing doing like the day before dry runs. So we've talked about it lots of times on this podcast before, how we check out all the different scenarios like parking lots, bathrooms, trails, kind of the whole area and the timing of things. So definitely would recommend, if you don't do dry runs already of your elopement day the day before, now would be a fantastic time to maybe start doing that. Yeah. If you are doing elopements in the national park or things that may have some questions when it comes to elopement day.
Yeah, and remember that your client's happiness is the difference between their expectations and reality. So doing those dry runs for us is great because then we can like communicate expectations to our couples, and hopefully their reality is even better than what we communicated to them as far as how their elopement day goes. And if you aren't doing dry runs and you show up and a trail is closed, or you can't get to some place, or you waste a bunch of time in line and this hasn't been communicated to your couples ahead of time, they might be stressed and they might have had the expectation that this was going to be a stress-free day, So make sure you're managing those expectations and just communicating the realities to your couples is really all we got to do. So what can we do to support our parks and our national forest land, all of our public lands? So what we can do is stay engaged without panicking. So again, let's not catastrophize. Let's keep in mind what the possibilities are for the future, but let's not totally freak out. We don't know what's going to happen. And right now, the national parks belong to us, and we have a say, and we have more power than people think because there's a lot of us, right? So instead of worrying about things that we can't control, let's focus on what we can do. So one of the things that we've been doing is using the 5 Calls app.
Yeah. So, growing up, we always heard you can, your representatives and your senators are there to represent you. And I guess I really didn't ever take stock in that or put value in it. And then the next step would be how do I even contact them? And so that was a huge barrier of oh, I'm not going to go dig and find a phone number or send an email.
Mm-hmm. And what do you even say to them?
Yeah, what do you say? And so we recently have become aware of this amazing free app. This podcast is not sponsored by this app, but it's amazing. So it's called 5 Calls. So the number 5 space calls, CALLS. You can get it on the Apple Store or wherever you get your apps. And it's really amazing. You basically just put in your zip code, and then it gives you kind of a list of who your representatives and your senators are that you can contact. It also has basically this list of issues that are at the forefront of the news and what's going on today. So basically you log in and just has a list. And so I'll just read a couple of them. So demand oversight of the FBI, stop the purge of federal workers. And the one that we're talking about today, defend our national parks. So it's really cool. So for say that one, you click on it, it kind of gives you a real short but concise summary. And then it gives you the list of the representatives that can affect this issue. So for us in New Mexico, it gave us 2 senators and our U.S. House representative.
Yeah, so you put your location in and it just auto-populates your representatives.
Yeah, and so then you can kind of go click on it. It gives you their phone numbers, and literally you just have to click it. You don't have to type it in or it's just amazing. So you click it, and it also has basically a script of what to say, which is very concise, addressing the needs and what you're asking your senator to do. So in this case, it's you demand that your representative push back on the Trump administration's efforts to devastate our national parks and public lands under the guise of cutting costs. Mm-hmm. So it tells you exactly what to do. I've done it several times where basically you just call, and usually it's someone really nice that answers the phone. They take down your message, and I've fumbled through it because I did it once when I was driving, and the other time I was doing lunch. The other really cool thing about this app is basically at the end of that, you can push a button that says what you were able to do. So if they were unavailable, if you were able to leave a message, leave a voicemail, basically it tallies that. And so that's kind of fun. You can see oh, for this particular issue, 14,000 people have done something about it. Mm-hmm. Actually, for this one, looking at the real-time data as of recording, 33,000 people had left calls, at least recorded with this 5 Calls app. So It's really cool. And the other thing is, if you don't want to speak to someone, you can just wait and call in off hours and leave a voicemail, and then they record it. I also asked the lady that took down one of my messages, does this even matter? Do you give these to our representative? And they said they take it very seriously. And so it's one of the greatest things, I guess, of the way our government works is that these people that we've hired or that we've elected are supposed to represent us in our locations.
Yeah, and what we want.
Yeah. So yeah, the 5 Call app, again, it's free. We'll leave a link to it in the show notes. Again, it's super easy. It'll take just a few minutes to download, a few minutes to make a call. And if the system works, our voices will be heard and our representatives will stand up for what we want, and it should work.
Yeah.
As designed.
Yeah. Yes, hopefully. Yeah, so one of the things we can do is annoy the crap out of our reps, right? And we can protest and we can call. And then the other thing we could do is we can donate our money or time to organizations like the National Parks Conservation Association, Leave No Trace, the Wilderness Society. And then also don't forget that there are many times that we can vote in between
the 4-year presidential cycle.
Yeah. So don't forget that you can also vote for your representatives. There's midterm elections. So prioritize voting for people that don't want to sell off our national parks. And we'll prioritize them and we'll keep them public and beautiful and funded and staffed so that we can continue enjoying them, not just for our jobs, but also for generations to come.
Yeah, and even at the smallest level, like we're talking about kind of bigger things, but at the smallest level, if you like attend or visit one of these national parks or national monuments, any kind of public lands, like leave it better than you found it. So like pick up some trash, park in the right spots, stay on the trails. So like just be a good steward of the land, and that goes a long way too. So that doesn't cost you any money or really any of your time other than just like your attention to do what's right.
Yeah, and you don't have to be perfect about any of this. Just do something. You don't have to be the perfect caller into your reps, and you don't have to be perfect with leave no trace. You just have to try. Don't take this as like an all or nothing thing where like, oh, if I can't call all my reps, I'm just not going to do anything. Like you could even just call one of them one day and like that will still make a difference. Just do something for this land. So thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode. I hope it was insightful and helpful. And anybody who's listening to this podcast should do something to help the land. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for joining us on this week's episode of Stoked. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. If you're looking for more inspiring elopement photography content, check us out on Instagram at Megan McPhail. And if you'd like to hear more about my business coaching and how I can personally help you hit six figures as an elopement photographer, then check out my website at www.meganmcphail.com.